Hey there, Cardfighters. It's Alejandro again here to bring you another deck profile for Team Midheaven. So I know we've been doing a lot more standard content. I want to thank you guys for all of the recent support that we've had. All the lore fights, being able to incorporate my art in the videos is really fun, and I love the enthusiasm, especially the VG-Tober going on right now. Our shorts have been really popping off and helping growth. So I hope you guys will like this deck profile. So it's going to be on the Fated One of Miracles Rezael. This is kind of post set 4, because I do have some thoughts about the new support that we got initial, and then I'll also kind of discuss what might change going into set 5, which will be more relevant to us December. But I would say this is a pretty good deck to take into the BCS season. So we'll go ahead and start off. I'm playing Wings of Aspiration Swell just for the Anarchetype starter. It's probably my favorite starter. For the grade 1, I like playing Patrol Gus of Ventesta. It's, the Anarchetype ride line. I have tried the Alden ride line, and it just didn't flow the way that I wanted to. Even though I am playing 8 grade 1 targets, there's really only one grade 1 that I want to be able to call that's not from hand. So in that case, I think just Ventesta is better, just being able to call and then soul charge. And I'll get to other ways of how you fix what you might soul charge blind in there. It's just a nice little body. Plus, it's really handy if you're just not seeing normal units, because during your grade 3 turn, he is a 10k base. So when you're going first, you're still able to hit your opponent without having to commit a lot to the board, especially against matchups like Varga, where you may not want to. And then Censor, Knight of Great Advance Censor, just a really good card. When you ride over it with Rezael, you get to choose a grade 2 or less unit from your drop and call it. So what's really nice about that is if you see Sergaion, Neighbor Escort, so something you need. If you don't have a cycle unit in your hand, or you're discarding something that you want to be able to call from the drop, it's basically just saying, hey, when you ride upon for free, you call a card, essentially. So that's how it feels. It's really, really good. And then, of course, we have Rezael, who the entire deck is based around. On attack, you counterblast, you check how many cards are in the damage, you call 2 units with 2 different grades to your rearguard circles. It doesn't matter where you're calling them, as long as they equal to or less than your damage zone. So if you have 3 damage, you can call a grade 2 and a grade 1, which is probably one of the easiest ways to play it. And then you have a once per game divine skill, which is Soul Blast. Return all your critical triggers from your drop into your deck, shuffle it. You'll get drive +1 during that turn, and then you get the red text that on your 6 damage, if it is a trigger of any kind besides a heal trigger, you will heal. So if you hit a heal trigger, it doesn't technically activate your divine skill. And so if you heal on 6 with a heal trigger, and then you hit a crit, you technically heal twice. If you hit over trigger, as what would be your 6 damage, it actually still heals you, and you'll actually go down to 4, which is a really funny interaction that I have actually yet to have happen, because that's super sacky. But regardless, this is the deck, so let's kind of go into it. And I'm going to go start with the grade 3s here. Now, there is one grade 3 that I'm not going to show off, because the grade 3 is kind of flex block, kind of attack, and I want to talk about it after I've shown off the rest of the deck. But obviously, I play, Persona Ride package in the deck. In my opinion, when the Fated King comes out, the upgrade to this one in set 5, you'll play the Fated King in the Ride line, and you'll probably still play 3 of this Rezael on the deck and 3 of the Persona Ride, because being able to put it in Soul, gain 5k scaling with your Vanguard, and to be able to call on the rear guard, and when you do that, all the cards you call get also additional power. That's really nice, because one of the big weaknesses with Rezael is while you're able to have board pressure, multi-attack, the deck compression, everything like that, it struggles on big numbers. And sometimes the biggest columns you're gonna make are 43,000 without triggers, and that can be if your opponent hits a defensive, that could easily be a trigger and an intercept to guard sometimes. Depending on if they have a front trigger or something like that, it becomes 1 card guards after a single defensive or 2, so you have to apply a lot of early pressure on and see a lot. Whereas the Fated King lets you genuinely get 5 attacks without having to compromise your columns. You'll call a column, and then you put out a card soul, and you just genuinely call another card, whether it's another booster or something like that. So it's really, really nice in that regard. So I can't wait for the Fated King, but still, Persona Ride. The other grade 3 you play is Gigantic Masher. He is kind of the unsung hero of the deck. When another rearguard was placed by the ability of your Vanguard with Rezael, it gets a static 15,000 power, so it becomes 28 or 38 during Persona Ride. What's really nice is he's not the one that's having to be called out. If, let's say, a previous turn you called him out, your opponent didn't retire it, you don't need to call over him to reestablish your board. You can actually leave him there, and then once you call your other columns, he'll pick up the 15 automatically, which is just really, really nice, because he's probably one of your biggest beefier attacks, but he doesn't really move the momentum forward besides just gaining power. So I like him at 1. That being said, when Gabrielius does come out, he's going to be replaced by Gabrielius pretty easy, because he also will get about the same amount of power once you're at 4 damage, and also perform a drive check in addition to that. So while also his ability is to check for triggers. So it's super, super nice. All right, cool. And let's go into the grade 2. So I want to start off with the cycle units. I'm playing a very interesting ratio, and I think this is kind of like the secret to this deck is how well you use your energy resources. So I'm playing 2 Biscottis, 2 Spiral Cutie Angels. And the reason for that is we're playing cards that do use energy. So like you don't want to use too much energy because you want to be able to loop those cards. But also you have some cards that also use your soul in addition, so you don't want to abuse your soul. So I think a happy medium between the two is 2 and 2. Spiral is there, so that way, like, you know, you see it, you're able to draw a card on write up. Same thing with Biscotti, you know, you might be able to pop an energy. If you can use like 1 to 2 cycles on your write up, you're going to be really floating nice with a nice early hand, even without Sergaion. But let's say we had 4 Biscottis, you might overuse your energy. If you had 4 Spiral Cuties instead, you might overuse your soul. So this is purely here for like resource management, and it'll make a lot more sense once I show you kind of like the big resource loops of the deck. But I have been in love with this balance. I think like I was struggling on utilizing my energy to maximize the potential of Nibiris, and this super helps out. And speaking of which, I play 3 copies of Nibiris right here. Nibiris is probably the best card in this deck. On play from drop by the skill of Rezael, or actually by any Vanguard technically from the drop, he'll pick up 10,000 powers. So 20k during non-persona, 30k during persona ride. Then his other skill is to Energy Blast 3, put him to soul, draw a card, and then you could check a top card of your deck and put it on top or bottom. So he can help you check offensive triggers, he can help you check defensive triggers, which is super, super cool. And also he just helps you get cards in hand without using a counter blast. So the Energy Blast puts him in a soul. The main issue is these guys get trapped in the soul, but we have some ways of getting him out. And that was part of the other resource management of trying to figure out how do I healthily be able to keep using these, because you want to be able to use 1 to 2 Nibirises every single turn. In fact, there are games where I don't see Biscotti and I'll have like 9 energy on my write up, and I'll have one of these in the drop and one of these in my hand, and I have no problem of like using one to during the main phase, even though it's not big rate power on my first attack. Get the draw, I get the scry, then on attack calling the other one and doing the same thing. And basically, if I have Sergaion, I'm like literally plussing 4 during that turn right there just because of this card right here. And then of course, you cannot deny the potential and the power of the Keter Pile. I know gone, grown Keter Pile decks, but she's just such a good card. When you play an order, you're able to play her as long as she was not played by a unit's ability. You get the Soul Blast 1, check top 5. So with the Wisdom clearing the World Order, you have to call 2 units from hand, you call her out, you Soul Blast 1, check top 5, call a unit. So she builds a board, but on top of that, if she attacks a grade 3 or greater unit, she gains 10,000 power. So during Persona Ride, she's a 30k attacker. So if you're trying to save your like boosters, 30k is a magic number against your opponent's 13k base, because one critical trigger turns them into a 28 defense. This is hitting 2,000 over it, so they're either forced to A, take the damage, use a critical trigger, intercept, or of course we're in a front trigger meta. For that exact reason, they will use a front trigger guard, which is still, again, a 20k shield out of their hand without having to commit to a booster. So building board, big number, and also I just love her art. It's like the only card I have is mostly base rarity, but looking to a friend, I was able to get at least one. I kind of joke that she's like my blaster blade of the deck. I absolutely love her, even though Spiral Cutie is probably still one of my favorites. So that's it for the grade 2s. So we'll get into the grade 1s. I'll start off with just making things simple. We'll start off with the Perfect Guards, 3 Perfect Guards, and Elementaria. Elementaria, of course, being useful for Sentinel Strix. It's kind of interesting, though, because, like, obviously with, like, Sentinel Strix and then, of course, Stride decks, it's really useful, Shiranui. But if Shiranui is not seeing, like, a lot of play, and, like, this deck draws a card, so, like, discarding a card isn't necessarily a problem, where it kind of does become a problem is against decks like Shotodoji that can, like, hyperextend. And if this is, like, if you have, like, 2 PGs in your hand and, like, 4 cards, it suddenly becomes a problem because you're going to have, like, no cards if you have to end up Perfect Guarding out. Whereas if you just played 4 regular vanillas, you have two regular vanillas in hand, 2 cards in hand, you can Perfect Guard, discard 1, and then Perfect Guard and still retain a card in hand. So it's part of one of those things where part of me, when seeing more tournament results, may consider just going 4 straight just effect PGs. But at the same time, you know, when you run across those decks, being able to like not have to use a card out of hand to use a Perfect Guard is sometimes really good. And of course, getting around like Sentinel Strix, except for Blindemeyer, of course. You can't get around with Blindemeyer, but still 4 Perfect Guards like you always do. Then we're going to go with my Anarchetype grade 1. This is the Countercharger. He is a 13k booster behind any rearguard, a 17k behind Rezael if you use his skill to countercharge. He's mostly here for that and also the countercharge. And the reason why he's 2 is you're really only using like 1 to 2 counterblast max a turn. The counterblast 2 is if you're going to be using the order. But if you're finding your opponent is damage denying you, it's also useful. Usually against decks that can like retire, you usually try to want to keep this in hand. You don't want to like discard it if you can. You're not really wanting to resurrect these guys from the drop, but 13k booster, 17k booster, still pretty good. Helps you hit magic numbers, especially during the push turn when you use your divine skill. So I like the card. I used to like him at 4, but with the other resources that I'm running, 2 has been great. I've never really ran into an issue, or maybe like once or twice, where like I just don't have him and I need the counterblast. But besides that, like it hasn't harpened me. Then Sergaion, a part of the Keter package. 13k booster when you have more units, or if you play in order, then end of battle, you retire him with the top 2 cards of your deck, get him to hand. This is integral to the strategy of the deck because kind of like Luard, you're trying to decompress the deck. So that way when you get to your divine skill turn, you're just maximizing trigger. Oh, I've got like 7 cards left in deck, but I've got all 8 triggers in the drop. Cool, divine skill. Suddenly your deck is just half crits and you're getting drive +1. Crazy card to help you thin out the deck in the early game. So between like this and also the Forefront Angel, I didn't quite mention it, but the other advantage of her is you're also thinning out the deck very aggressively. You're trying to aggressively thin out the deck on right up to get to your win condition. Because while I'm not the belief that this deck, there is a hostage version of this deck, I'm not a fan of the hostage version. I don't want to take super long with games, especially with how like much like Shododoji can extend. Being hyper aggressive, I think, is the way to go, and this really helps you get there really fast. On the flip side, you can deck out, and I have decked out in some games, but for the most part, just being able to like thin the deck out rapidly and just make it all crits is really nice. And then the other card, this is going to extend into the order package. Obligator Dragon is really cool because when you place him from hand, you discard a card from your hand and you search your deck for a normal order, and then you put it to the drop, and then you can play it from the drop, and then if you play it from the drop, you just bottom deck it. The reason why I like this is because it's a body on board and it prevents you from having to play so many orders and relying them in hand. Because, and I'm sure the Zorga players know this, but when you have so many orders in your hand, you just don't have shield for days. So Obligator Dragon is really nice just because it just tutors out your orders. It can also put them on the bottom of the deck, so you're not going to redraw into them until you need to use an Obligator Dragon again. Plus, also with Sergaion bottom decking so many cards, you know, if you're putting triggers constantly to the bottom of the deck because you're trying to filter for normal units, he helps shuffle the deck before you use the divine skill. So super nice in that regard. And because we're playing the order package, or the Obligator Dragons, we don't have to play too many orders. I'll start off the one that you can't play with his skill, and it's just Bracing Angel Ladder. This is definitely a meta pick. You know, I've seen decks where you use Rezael to ensure persona rides, because again, you need to hit numbers, but being able to protect yourself from like board retire, dominate, Shododoji, like if you could pop this against first turn against Shododoji, be able to full aggro. I'll kind of give a little bit of a brief how to counter Shododoji, because I have not lost a Shododoji since I've started picking up this way to counter the deck. But this will really help you out. You draw a card, you get an extra card in soul that also lets you use some of your other resources if you've been hyperextending your soul. But just super nice card. Just put it into soul, draw a card, give your units protection for an entire turn against your opponent. You just can't search it off of Obligator Dragon. But you can add this off of, and I didn't mention that, but with the Forefront Angel T-Faults, her top 5 skill doesn't just let you call it a unit. You can actually grab an order, any normal order with it, and it does not restrict you to Regardless. So you're actually able to go ahead and grab Bracing Angel Ladder from that skill. Whereas some cards will say without Regardless, like Obligator Dragons, you're able to add these with Forefront Angel. So let's say on grade 2, you do the Counterblast, call 2, make a full board, and you like, okay, cool, I didn't see Sergaion, but I saw Bracing Angel. Grab it if your matchup is that kind of sort of thing to help you prepare against your opponent. And then as far as the 3 orders that I play, I just play 2 copies of Wisdom, beginning of Clear the World, and 1 copy of Trumpet of Blessing. This is a part of the tried and true Keter package. It'll still be played in the deck this way when the Fated King comes out. It's just Counterblast 1, draw 2 cards, but you have to call 2 cards from your hand or discard it as long as they're grade equal to or less than your Vanguard. So optimally, you're wanting to have 2 of the Forefront Angels in your hand defaults. You Counterblast 1, you draw 2, and then you call 2 from your hand, then you Soul Blast, you know, for each one, check top 5, and like call Sergaion if you need to. And then that way, Sergaion's skill also triggers if your opponent's playing a deck because you don't have board and will name more units than you. This will let the Sergaion still trigger, which is really cool. And then honestly, my favorite tech in this deck is Trumpet of Blessing. Trumpet of Blessing is really nice because its skill is Soul Blast 1, you look at top 2 cards of your deck, you can choose up to 1 grade 3 or less card from among them and call to the rear guard circle, and then you put the rest on top of your deck in any order. So you don't have to call a unit from this. But what's nice is remember I said before, Nibiris gets stuck in Soul. And the only cards that we have to Soul Blast are T-Fault, Rezael's Divine Skill, and that's pretty much it. And Spiral Kitty Angel on the right out. So if those Nibirises get stuck in the Soul, you can't really keep looping them. So also, too, let's say you're in a game situation where you only have 1 Forefront Angel in your hand, but you have Obligator Dragon, and you're not confident that you're going to draw into another normal unit, and you don't want to end up drawing 2 triggers and forcing yourself to like have to call a trigger from hand or your Persona Ride. You can just use Obligator Dragon, discard, search this instead, Soul Blast a card, look at top 2, maybe call something off of it, and then you could play the Forefront Angel from your hand and do the Soul Blast, check top 5, and call a card. What's even nicer is, and actually it happens a lot more than I would expect, sometimes I do see the 4/4 Angels off of this, and it's just super, super nice. So really good utility. Basically, this lets you play in a situation where, like, let's say you are being counterblast tonight. Like, there was a game where I only had one counterblast, I didn't have my counter charger, and I could have used the Minerva order to build the board, but with Obligator Dragon, I was able to search this instead, build my board because I didn't have a board against Shiranui because of the whole Dominate, Retire, and all that other stuff, and I only had the one counterblast open because I chose not to attack into my Vanguard. Then in that case, I was able to use this, and I was still able to push for game in that instance, which is super, super nice. So super great cards. Then I'm going to go ahead and talk about that tech I was telling you about. So before I go on the triggers, we'll go ahead and talk about this. This is my flex spot. This is Rezael. Rezael is very, very format dependent. She has this guard skill ability that when placed on the Guardian Circle, if you have a unit with a Divine skill, you choose 2 cards from the bind zone, you bottom deck them, discard a card from your hand, and she's basically like a 5th perfect guard. She's really there because, I mean, one, the Blingmeyer matchup, right? If you're just getting toasted, she's a nice little perfect guard against Blingmeyer, also recycles your units to help you not deck out. But also, Shotodoji does put units temporarily in the bind zone, and they may already have the cards to get rid of them. They may put them in the drop against you, things like that. So you're able to use this, get a perfect guard against their extension, things like that. I can't say that I've been able to actually see it in those optimal moments. I'm like, last time I played Blingmeyer, and when I lost to it, this was the first card to hit the damage zone, so it was super unfortunate. But like, this could be changed to a number of things. There's the grade 1 that if it's like the 5th battle, you're able to bind that unit and like get a perfect guard. That's also a viable option. There also is that new grade 0 that's coming out this week in the new set in set 4. I really don't know if I want to play that grade 0. It's pretty simple. When it, if it's called and you have a Vanguard with Rezael, you're able to give a unit 5k, and if this was called by the effect of your Vanguard Rezael, you can give that unit 10k instead, so you can be able to give anything. The grade 0 is not something you want to play multiple of. Ideally, you're wanting to call like Nibris and Sergaion every single time if you can, or Gigantic Masher if you're trying to go for push. There's almost no reason to call a grade 0 unless you're at a position where it's like, okay, cool, I only have 2 damage, I can't call Sergaion, but I want to be able to get power and still draw, so I'll call Nibris, and then I might have to call Trigger, or I might have to call my starter. So on the trade-off, you could run the grade 0 as your starter, but then you lose the ability to draw going second, which, like, as you can tell in Premium, no one runs Forerunners as their starter anymore because just the ability to draw a card is just extremely powerful. So maybe I'll try experimenting it. We'll see. Maybe I'll do it in a fight video. But for now, I'm using Rezael as my flex spot just because she's a perfect guard and also just incredibly pretty. And you guys know I love Angel Feather. And then lastly, I'll go into my trigger lineup. This is probably one of the easiest trigger lineups you can have in a deck. So I play 3 front triggers. I have... You want to play 8 crits. Now, I do love getting experimental when it comes to trigger lineups. This is just not a deck you do it in. We're in a front trigger meta. You draw enough with everything else that if you were to play draw triggers, you would end up decking yourself out. So front triggers are nice because you get power to your front row. Like I said, this deck struggles to make numbers of your opponent hits it defensive, so front triggers help break it through it. It's also just a 20k shield, which is super, super nice. And then, of course, you have your critical triggers, which the lovely thing about this deck is you're really able to afford to use these to guard. You want to be able to keep your damage low enough when you can, so you can abuse your guard because by the time you pop your Divine skill, you're able to put these back into your deck. Now, my rule of thumb is you want to sufficiently, depending on the game state, wait for a while to do your Divine skill. Some people will pop it first turn. Some they do in the anime, like Akina always pops it off first grade 3 turn. I don't agree with that. Sometimes you might do it on your first Persona Right turn, but the problem is your opponent's had a grade 3 turn by that point, or maybe they've even had a Persona Right turn. Their hand is big. You want to wear them out. You want to reduce their hand as much as possible, reduce your deck as much as possible without decking out. Then by your second Persona Right turn, which you should be drawing with Sergaions and filtering, that's when you'll put as many crits as possible back into the deck. If these hit your damage zone, the first cards you want to counterblast are these cards, because you want to be able to heal and put your crit into the drop. That way you can sufficiently decompress your deck and put as many crits with that Divine skill, because it is just like doing 8 turns of like Luard striding in just one go. Whereas Luard obviously scaled because of the G zone and got like the guard restrict. You're able to put all 8 crits back if that is the case. And then of course 4 heal triggers. And then lastly, we'll talk about the over trigger, because this is probably where you can get the most creative in the deck. We have a lot of over triggers now in the deck. The key over trigger just isn't as good anymore in my opinion. It was best in like Bastion, where you had multiple grade 3s that could get, Twin Drive. but with how much this deck draws already, getting multiple drive checks is powerful, but it may not win games. I like using Sulfere, which is like the blue overtrigger that gets a crit, grabs a card from a drop. That card's really nice, and it can just win a game. But what's even nicer is when you have a decompressed deck and you haven't checked overtrigger, if you check out critical trigger and you give it to a rear guard, then you check the red overtrigger and you give it that same rear guard. That rear guard is going to be attacking for 100 million twice for like 2 crits. So super good. You could get multi-attack by like using the purple or the new dark purple overtrigger, because it'll grab a card from your damage zone and call a card. But the issue with that is sequencing wise is usually by that time you already have 2 standing rear guards, so you don't get as much value from that. So because you're always going to have a standing rear guard when you attack with Vanguard because of his skill, this can ensure you attack extension with big power and is super devastating. Whereas if your opponent has 2 PGs and they perfect guard your Vanguard, and let's say you check Sulfere, you give a unit 100 million and a crit, it could just perfect guard that attack. But if they have 2 perfect guards and you check this and you give it to that unit, crit or not, they might block 2 attacks, but it's going to restand and attack again. So that is why I like running the red overtrigger. So guys, that is my deck profile for Rezael. Thank you guys so much for the support that you've given us lately. We plan on doing a lot more deck profiles, a lot more fight videos. We have some interesting content ideas that we've had, so if there's anything that you'd like us to do, let us know. We'll have, of course, continue our lore fight series. We might even start doing shorts once Vegetover's over that kind of like goes into little short details of like Kray's history, which is like Kray Adventure is on Twitter. Really great guy. He's been able to translate a lot of the lore. There is some lore that has been officially translated by Bushy Road, but just not enough. But we really like incorporating that into our card fights, whether it's standard or even some of the premium videos that we've done. And then also tag fight used to be a thing, and we're really hoping we can find a way to incorporate tag fight into standard. Maybe that way we can do a 2v2 video. We think that would be really fun. So guys, again, thank you. We're really close to 600 subscribers, so please like, comment, subscribe, and thank you all for visiting our channel, and have a great day.